A cold wind cuts across Moscow. Street lamps flicker. Snow falls in slow spirals, settling on empty sidewalks and silent cars. It is late, colder than usual, the kind of night where most people hurry home and keep their heads down. But one man is waiting, watching, planning. A station chief from the CIA stands alone beside his car at a small gas station. He believes he is invisible here, just another American filling his tank. Then a man in a long coat emerges from the shadows. He walks straight toward the American, no hesitation, no fear. And in a city where every move is watched, where the KGB is everywhere, that kind of confidence means one of two things. Either the man is insane or he is desperate. The stranger slips a folded piece of paper through the car window. No words, no expression. And then he is gone, just like that. Swallowed by the night. The station chief opens the note. It contains a message that will change the future of American intelligence. A message claiming access to Soviet secrets so valuable that Washington could shift its entire defense strategy. A message promising information worth billions of dollars. Remember this moment, because the man who delivered that note will soon become the most valuable spy the CIA ever ran inside the Soviet Union, and also one of the most doomed. Before we go deeper into this story, I have to tell you something. Something personal. Something I normally keep to myself. My name is Michael Graves, but the man who raised me rarely used names. In his world, identities were fragile things. For 25 years, he worked in places that had no windows, in rooms where conversations were never written down, in offices where people arrived under one name and left under another. Before dementia began stealing his mind, before he forgot who I was, he handed me something I was never meant to see. A leather-bound diary, old, worn, and filled with secrets. Inside, he wrote about missions gone wrong, operations that never reached newspapers, double agents who fell through cracks, and the hidden cost of trusting the wrong person. Some names were circled, some were underlined, a few had warnings beside them. But there was one name he marked more heavily than the rest. One file he said haunted him for years. One story he begged me never to forget. The name was Adolf Tolkachev. What you are about to hear is not just a retelling. It is a reconstruction of the details my father left behind, a story of betrayal, courage, and devastation. A story that shaped modern espionage and cost lives on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. If stories like this matter to you, if understanding the truth behind these hidden wars helps you see the world more clearly, then please subscribe and like this video. You will help this channel grow, and you will never miss another story buried beneath decades of secrecy. Now let us open the next page of the diary, because the story of Adolf Tolkachev begins long before that winter night. And what came next is far more shocking than the CIA ever expected. Moscow in the late 1970s was a fortress disguised as a city. Everyone watched everyone else. Foreigners were followed as soon as they stepped out of their apartments. Diplomats knew their phones were tapped. Garbage was searched. Even restaurant reservations could be monitored. It was a place where trust did not exist, which makes the next part even stranger. For months after that first note, the CIA did nothing. They assumed the offer was a trap. The KGB was famous for dangling fake volunteers to expose CIA officers. One wrong move could destroy the entire Moscow station, and so the Americans waited and watched and worried, but the man did not give up. He returned again and again and again. leaving notes for the CIA station chief, following him to markets, approaching him on cold nights, always alone, always risking everything. Until finally, he delivered something that changed everything. This time, the note contained real intelligence, specifics, technical details about Soviet radar systems, military avionics, weapons control modules, information that no ordinary citizen could access. Information so valuable that American engineers later estimated it saved the United States more than $2 billion in research. The man signed his name, Adolf Tolkachev, engineer, dissident, father, husband, and soon the most dangerous spy in Moscow. But before we go deeper, you need to understand something about this man. He was not motivated by money. Not really. He lived comfortably. He had an apartment, a respected job. He had access to good food, awards, academic recognition. He had no reason to risk his life for the CIA. What he wanted was revenge. And the reason for that revenge is written clearly in my father's notes. A story so tragic and so powerful that even the CIA officers who handled him hesitated to believe it at first. Tolkachev's wife, Natasha, lost her parents to Stalin's purges. Her mother executed for the crime of visiting a foreign relative. Her father sent to a camp and returned a broken man. Natasha grew up in an orphanage without a family, without love, without anyone to explain why her world had been destroyed. This shaped Tolkachev's heart. It filled him with a quiet, burning rage, not the dramatic kind, not the shouting kind, the kind that lives deep inside the bones, the kind that waits. He once wrote in a letter to the CIA that he felt a worm inside him, something turning, something twisting, something telling him that he had to do something, that he could not remain silent, that he needed to fight back, not with guns, not with words, but with information. That worm would become the engine behind one of the greatest espionage operations of the 20th century. And if you think his motivation is already intense, what he did next is even more jaw-dropping. Tolkachev's determination shocked even the most seasoned CIA officers. In a city where a suspicious glance could land you under surveillance, he walked straight toward Americans over and over again. He was not reckless. He was deliberate, precise, almost cold in the way he accepted the danger. My father wrote in his diary that Tolkachev reminded him of something rare, a man who had already accepted death and therefore feared nothing. And people like that often change history. But at CIA headquarters in Langley, nobody believed him at first. They dismissed his letters. They marked his notes as potential KGB bait. They argued that no Soviet engineer with access to that level of information would voluntarily walk into a death sentence. But while Langley debated and hesitated, Tolkachev kept pushing carefully, calculated, persistent as gravity. In one note, he sketched diagrams of meeting points. In another, he explained why he was real. In a third, he included technical details about Soviet radar systems that were later confirmed as genuine. Finally, after nearly a year of silence, Washington sent a message to Moscow, one word: proceed. And just like that, a new chapter in spy history began. January 1979. Moscow was frozen solid, icy streets, heavy coats, eyes that never stopped watching. It was the worst place on earth to run an agent, but the CIA had no choice. They had to meet him. John Gilsher, a Russian-speaking case officer, was selected to make the first contact. He ran surveillance detection routes for hours, weaving through alleys, doubling back through markets, walking into shops and exiting through side doors. When he was finally sure he was clean, he found a public phone and dialed the number Tolkachev had left. The voice that answered did not belong to Tolkachev. His wife picked up instead. The call had to be cut short. The next day, Gilshire tried again. The same result. It was frustrating, dangerous, and nerve-shredding. But then it happened. Late one night, while Gilshire and the station chief were driving home, a figure appeared on the sidewalk holding 2 pieces of plywood with numbers painted on them. It was the missing part of his phone number, a silent message, a sign of trust. Shortly after, they met in person for the first time. It was New Year's Day, icy wind, dim street lamps, empty roads. Tolkachev arrived wearing thick glasses, a heavy coat, and the kind of expression my father described as controlled exhaustion. He handed over a package, 91 handwritten pages filled with technical secrets about Soviet radar, missile guidance systems, electronic warfare equipment, and aircraft designs so advanced that American engineers would later call the material priceless, not expensive, not valuable, priceless. And yet the man who delivered them stood in the cold with no gloves, no scarf, no protection except a quiet resolve carved into his bones. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. You need to understand the magnitude of what Tolkachev gave the CIA. This was not gossip. This was not stolen memos or rumors. This was the blueprint of the future Soviet Air Force he provided. Radar frequencies, electronic warfare vulnerabilities, missile targeting systems, aircraft cockpit diagrams, guidance algorithms, specifications that revealed exactly what American pilots would face in a war, insights that saved the Pentagon billions, and weaknesses that the United States exploited for years. Imagine fighting someone in the dark, then suddenly someone hands you a map, a flashlight, and the enemy's entire playbook. That is what Tolkachev did, one man, alone, with nothing but a camera and access to restricted files. CIA engineers called him the billion-dollar spy for a reason. He single-handedly changed the balance of power during the Cold War, but behind that brilliance was something darker. He was not chasing money. He was chasing pain. He was chasing a revenge that had been growing inside him since the day he learned what Stalin had done to the woman he loved. He wrote in one letter, "I want to do the greatest possible damage to the Soviet Union in the shortest amount of time." My father circled that line in his diary twice. By day, Tolkachev looked like any other engineer. Quiet, intelligent, unremarkable. A man who walked the halls of a Soviet research institute with a stack of documents under his arm and a pen in his pocket. But at night, he photographed those documents using tiny CIA cameras, hundreds of pages, hundreds of rolls of film. He worked alone, in poor lighting, hunched over a desk while his family slept in the next room. He risked everything with every click of the shutter. One mistake meant execution. One shadow out of place, one neighbor awake, one unexpected knock on the door. He knew this. He embraced it. But the cameras were not cooperating. They clicked too loudly. The light was too dim. They shook too easily. So he proposed something bold, dangerous, almost insane. He asked the CIA to clone his building pass. If he had 2 passes, he could leave one at the library and smuggle documents out of the building. A brilliant plan, a suicidal one. Fortunately, the Research Institute reversed its security measures weeks later. If they had not, he would have been caught. But he kept going. Building pass or not, he found ways to keep the information flowing. Tolkachev was not a typical spy. He was not paid by the CIA until much later. He lived modestly. His requests were small: Western music for his son, a stereo system, some art books, advice on receiving Western radio broadcasts. He once said that he wished he could spend the money, but there was nothing to buy in Moscow anyway. Eventually, the CIA set up a financial parachute for him. They kept the funds in the West, under his name, in case he ever needed to escape. But there was one request that haunted the CIA leadership. Tolkachev wanted a cyanide pill. He said he refused to be taken alive. He refused to let the KGB extract his secrets. He refused to let his family watch him be broken. After long debates, the CIA gave it to him. My father wrote 8 words beside this entry in his diary. A man prepared for death is unstoppable. Moscow in the early 1980s became even more dangerous. The KGB was tightening surveillance. American diplomats were followed everywhere, and meetings became almost impossible. Dead drops barely lasted a few weeks before someone noticed them. Cars were tailed the moment they left embassy grounds. Bus stops were watched, parks were monitored, and entire districts felt as if they were breathing with hidden eyes. Yet, through all of this, Tolkachev continued delivering some of the most valuable intelligence of the Cold War. He passed on designs for new Soviet fighter aircraft, detailed information about missile defense radars, surface-to-air missile systems, electronic countermeasure tests, jam-proof radar modifications, and even insights into future projects still in development. His information shaped American defense strategy for years, influencing military spending, aircraft design, and battlefield tactics. But the KGB was closing in. They sensed that somewhere inside their system, a leak was growing. They launched internal investigations, tightened security inside his institute, restricted documents, and whispered that an engineer might be feeding secrets to the West. Realizing how close danger had come, Tolkachev burned every incriminating item in his home, turning letters, notes, packaging, equipment, and scraps of paper into nothing but ash. He believed he had erased the trail. He believed he had survived the danger. He was wrong. The year 1985 changed everything. My father wrote in his diary that the CIA called it the Year of the Spy. Multiple American agents were betrayed in rapid succession. Rockets were compromised, secret operations collapsed, and informants who had served loyally for years were imprisoned or executed. There was only one explanation. Somewhere inside American intelligence, a mole was passing names to the KGB. 2 individuals quickly rose to suspicion: Aldrich Ames and Edward Lee Howard. Both had access, both had motive, and both had already burned agents before. What the CIA did not know at the time was that one of them had already pointed the KGB directly toward Adolf Tolkachev. The trap had been set long before anyone noticed. Late in the spring of 1985, the CIA signaled for a meeting. Tolkachev did not respond at first. Then he did. Then he vanished. Then he appeared again. His pattern became frantic and confusing, alternating between signals and silence, leaving the CIA unsure whether he was afraid, compromised, or simply cautious. To them, it looked like fear. To the KGB, it looked like confirmation. On June 13th, the CIA spotted the window of his apartment open, the prearranged signal that he was ready to meet, but he was not. The KGB had opened the window themselves. It was a trap. When the CIA case officer arrived at the designated meeting site, a dozen KGB agents burst from the nearby bushes, arrested him immediately, and searched the bag he carried. Hours later, he was expelled from the Soviet Union, still unaware that Tolkachev had already been taken. Days earlier, while driving with his wife outside Moscow, Tolkachev was stopped at a police checkpoint. When he stepped out of the car, men appeared from behind, grabbed him, pressed a rag over his mouth, and dragged him into a waiting van. He was taken to Lefortovo prison, a place where countless men like him had disappeared, never to be heard from again. The CIA never saw Adolf Tolkachev again. The KGB searched his home and discovered the cyanide pill he had fought so hard to obtain. They found documents, notes, and enough evidence of espionage to condemn him many times over. He was tried behind closed doors, found guilty of high treason, and sentenced to death. Executions in the Soviet Union were quick and merciless. A guard would enter the room, order the prisoner to turn away, and fire a single bullet into the back of the head. It is believed this was how Adolf Tolkachev's life ended. His wife Natasha refused to denounce him and was sentenced to a labor camp. She survived 2 years, returned to Moscow, and died of cancer in 1991. Her appeals to the United States for medical help never received a response. Their son Oleg remained in Moscow and became an architect, living a quiet life as the son of a man who shook an empire. The information Adolf Tolkachev provided continued to influence American defense strategy for nearly a decade after his death. Engineers used his data to design better aircraft, military planners used it to understand Soviet weaknesses, and intelligence analysts studied it to refine radar jamming techniques, strike strategies, and pilot training. He is remembered as the billion-dollar spy, not because of the money he received, but because of the money he saved the United States and the enormous strategic advantage he delivered. He was one man standing against an empire, and he inflicted more damage on the Soviet military than entire intelligence units managed across their careers. My father wrote one final line beneath his file. If courage has a price, he paid it in full. When you look back at stories like this, it becomes clear that the Cold War was not won solely by governments, generals, or armies. It was shaped by individuals, ordinary people, who chose to resist something they believed to be deeply wrong. People who found courage when silence would have been safer. Tolkachev knew exactly what waited for him if he was caught, but he continued anyway. Not for wealth, not for recognition, but for something heavier, something personal, something that burned inside him until the very end. Stories like his remind us that history often turns because of people whose names were almost erased, whose actions were buried in classified files or locked away in notebooks. No one was supposed to read, but not this one, and not today. If this story moved you, if it reminded you how much courage has been sacrificed in the shadows to protect freedom, then please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps this channel grow, and it keeps these hidden chapters of history alive for future generations. And before you go, I invite you to write a simple message in the comments. God bless America, and God bless the people who have fought to keep it safe. Your words help honor those whose names were lost in the dark so that others could live in the light. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. God bless America.